From talk of a bomb to the prospect of economic boom, Iran prepares to open for business with opportunities worth billions of dollars on offer. But can Tehran stick to the terms of its nuclear deal? And how will international investors react? This is Inside Story. Hello, a warm welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. Well, after years of international isolation and weighed down by sanctions, Iran is edging back in from the cold and preparing to shrug off the constraints which have undermined its economy. Along with a new deal to curb its nuclear program come boundless new opportunities, and foreign businesses are understandably keen to engage with Iran. Perhaps not surprisingly, some of the groundwork has been taking place as the nuclear negotiations progressed. It means already Iran is finalizing oil and gas deals worth an estimated $100 billion. In aviation, Tehran needs at least 400 new aircraft worth up to $20 billion to replace an aging fleet. And Germany, for example, expects to sell more cars, chemicals and renewable energy to Iran. Exports could soar to $10 billion from $2.5 billion last year. The tech market in Iran is estimated to grow to $16 billion annually from $4 billion now. Apple is said to be looking for distribution partners there. All told, an Iranian population close to 80 million people is likely to spend about $176 billion this year, while the total annual disposable income at stake is estimated at around $287 billion. With those sort of numbers, the queue to Tehran's door looks like it might be a long one. Now, these are, of course, exceptional circumstances with some regional opposition to the deal, and US President Barack Obama even suggesting that Iran with a nuclear bomb would likely have meant war.
I said they've been an enemy, yeah. I mean, we're still adversaries. We're not allies and friends by any means, and this agreement does only one thing. And you heard the Ayatollah just in the last days proclaiming the continued enmity with the United States. So there are no illusions about that. What we know, however, is that an Iran without a nuclear weapon is a very different country than Iran with one, and that a Middle East without a nuclear weapon is a safer Middle East. So we believe that Israel, we believe the region, will ultimately be much safer because of this deal. Now, if we don't do this deal, if Congress says no to this deal, then there will be no restraints on Iran. There will be no sanctions left. Our friends in this effort will desert us. We will be viewed as having killed the opportunity to stop them from having a weapon. They will begin to enrich again, and the greater likelihood is what the president said the other day: you'll have a war.
This regime has just received a dream deal. It's getting it may get a deal that may block or delay Iran's path to 1 or 2 bombs for the next few years, assuming they don't cheat, but paves their way to many, many bombs after a decade or so, because they become a threshold state with full international legitimacy. And to boot, they also get a cash bonanza to fund their terrorists and aggression against us, against the region, against America and the world. So I think this is a very bad deal with a very bad regime.
So that's the backdrop international investors will no doubt be conscious of. Let's get the thoughts now of our guests on the prospect of doing business with Iran, starting with Tehran, where we have Sadiq Zibakalam, a political professor from Tehran University. In our London studio is Sara Bazubandi, an associate fellow from the Middle East North Africa program at Chatham House. And joining us from Vienna is Bijan Khajapour, managing partner at Atier International, a consulting firm which advises companies on entering Iranian markets. Good to have you all with us. Sadiq Zibakalam, let me start with you since you're in Tehran. What do you think the economic impact of this deal is going to be, not just for Iran, but for the countries that do business with Iran? And is it perhaps being overstated?
I think the prospect, or rather the potential for a huge economic recovery for Iran would be great, because as you in your introductory remarks quite correctly stated, Iran economy has been sort of stagnant during the past few years, primarily because of the sanctions, of course, but the corruption, state management, and basically a state-run economy. These are the fundamental problems that Iran is facing, and they would not simply disappear because of the historical the nuclear deal. The fact that the state is controlling the Iranian economy, that is not something that we should expect to be removed overnight. The fact that the Revolutionary Guard and other of the military organizations, because of the sanctions, they have become to occupy a very important position in within Iranian economy, and we cannot expect them to go back and say that, oh well, this is it, we have been running the country's economy during the past 4 years, 5 years, now the sanctions are over, Allahu Akbar, God be great, and we will go back to our barrack. No, they would try to actually benefit from the deal. But I'm not trying to say that because of these problems, because of these hurdles, there won't be any changes. No, there would be huge changes. There would be enormous potential, economic potential for Europe, for Iran's neighbors, and for 80 million Iranian population.
All right, Bijan Khajipur, as someone who advises international investors in Iran, what do you think this is going to do for your clients?
First of all, it's going to open the huge Iranian market to Western businesses. I mean, it's inaccurate to say that Iran was fully isolated. Iran was still doing a lot of trade, but it was isolated from Western economies, and obviously the implementation of this deal and the lifting of sanctions will pave the way for Western companies to re-engage in Iran. And what it will actually do for Iran is also significant, because one can say Iran was actually buying what it needed either directly from Asian providers or from Russia and other countries, and even sometimes indirectly from Western economies through third countries. But essentially, a lot of the technologies that Iran needed to fully utilize the potential of its economy were actually missing. Missing because Western companies were not there to implement the technologies or to sell the equipment needed. And what we will see, and this is what I tell my clients as well, is an economy that will use the new opportunities to increase its efficiency, to modernize, to upgrade, and to become a much more advanced economy and much more technology-based economy than it was before. And I think this is good for Iran, this is definitely good for the region, and it will definitely create opportunities also for some of the regional partners that we have, especially in the field of energy and gas-based industries.
Sara Bazubandi, what's your take on all of this? Is this going to be the big gold rush that many people are making out?
I think the lift of the sanction has three major components. One is the redirection of the frozen assets to Iranian economy. What is going to happen with these assets and how these resources are going to be managed is quite unknown to everyone. Whatever we say at the moment is going to be purely speculative, so one needs to be a bit humble in making such analysis. But the areas that are likely to absorb these resources based on the current situation of the Iranian economy is obviously to pay some of the government debts, to recover some of the government institutions, industrial units who are desperate for paying delayed wages, or reform and revitalization of some of the stressed assets and stressed balance balance sheets of the state-owned banks. At the same time, of course, there are lots of infrastructure and development projects that have been kept on hold as a result of the sanctions and due to lack of resources. So perhaps the government is going to prioritize some of these projects. One major area that I think the administration would probably and is required, perhaps sensibly, to take into consideration is to save some of these assets and deposit some of these assets in the so-called sovereign wealth fund. If the administration looks at the other neighboring countries around the Persian Gulf, most of the oil-rich economies around the region have hundreds of billions of dollars in their sovereign wealth funds, and Iran is very much lagging behind. So this is one of those areas that perhaps needs to be taken into consideration. The next component is the trade. Trade, of course, one area is the energy trade. What is going to happen with Iran's future in the oil market, with the current prices, and gaining back the share of the market that Iran has lost over the past few years is going to be a big challenge. Iran production capacity will perhaps be in the position to catch up with fairly similar level before the sanctions were tightened, but at the moment, to gaining the market share for Iran is going to be a challenge, and of course it's expected to have some downward-looking pressure on the global oil prices. Then, in terms of non-oil trade, of course, this deal and the lift of sanctions are going to have an impact. Iran is, as the other two guests mentioned, has a very big market. Consumer goods, industrial goods, other forms of medical supplies and so forth are going to be directed towards Iran. To what extent Iran consumer market has capacity to absorb and has the purchasing power, it remains very much to the other areas of sanctions impact on the economy, how much it would contribute to employment, how much it would contribute towards increase of people's purchasing power, and so forth.
You bring up a number of issues there, which hopefully we'll get into more a little bit later in the program. But let's just pause for a moment and take a look at how international sanctions have hurt Iran's economy. Now, the World Bank says Iran's gross domestic product, or GDP, was a little more than $415 billion last year, with a growth of only 1.5%. That's down from the more than $576 billion GDP in 2012, the highest in the past decade. Now, inflation in Iran was 23% in 2014, still high, but well down from the previous year. And unemployment was running at a little over 14% in 2014, up by more than 1% from 2013. So, Sadegh Zibakalam, I mean, we saw the pictures last week after the deal was announced of so many people in Iran taking to the streets and celebrating, because obviously for them this is, I mean, the statistics that we just brought up there, they're hoping that this deal will bring an end to some of that, bring some relief. What's life been like for Iranians under the sanctions regime? Just talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, Hazem, if you were living in Iran during the past few months, you would have been very surprised, astonished, because many younger younger generation Iranian, even those who belong to the more affluent part of the society, the more educated, they were so anxious. They were following minute by minute the negotiation, whether it was in Lausanne in March, or whether it was in Vienna last week. If you ask them that, well, look, you appear to be coming from a very well-off family. I mean, why are you so worried about the prospect of the deal go through and the sanctions to be lifted? He would tell you that, well, look, you are right, sanctions have not very much affected me. It's a psychological burden. It's the psychological, social, and political chains that were in our mind. It is going on more than 12 years of conflict between United States and the West over our nuclear program, whether or not the sanctions would go out, whether there would be more sanctions, whether Iran would be attacked by Israel or by United States. Our industrial sites would be attacked, or only our nuclear sites would be attacked. You see, these psychological effects, especially on the younger generation, have been very bad. And the fact that the people pour out onto the streets the other night when they heard that eventually there was the historical deal, it's because they feel relief. What I'm really trying to say, Hazem, is that it's not only economy. Everything is not economy. It's a psychological burden. They feel that they are free, and the haunt, the spirit, the ghost of confrontation with the West over the Iranian nuclear program is not after the Iranian society, is not chasing the Iranian society. Well, that is, I think, a very important consideration. Of course, you don't see it amongst inflation figures, GDP figures, but it is very important. Remember, we have 6 million unemployed Iranians. That's a huge number.
Bijan Khajipur, what's your take on this in terms of the immediate impact that this might have on people inside Iran? I mean, is it going to take several more months yet before we see any change?
I agree with Dr. Ziba Kalam that the main impact right now is psychological. And I think, if you want to say it very simply, it's a feeling of returning to normalcy. For not just the past 12 years, for a very long time, the Iranian population has lived under this notion of being, threatened, being sanctioned, and not being normal, being treated as a rogue state. I think a return to normalcy is going to definitely release new energies, release new potential. The psychological impact is important. The real impact from sanctions relief will come at a later stage. We all know that. So the sanctions may start being lifted in late 2015, maybe early 2016, and then the real impact will come then. But the psychological impact is going to create jobs and is going to create an economic momentum. One of the reasons being that a lot of the investment decisions inside the Iranian economy were actually waiting for this. If you looked more closely at the housing market in Iran, for example, the property market was relatively stagnant because everyone was in a wait-and-see mode. Now that we know that the sanctions will be lifted, now that we know that the government will have more resources to invest, I guess a lot of Iranian investors will engage in property investments. That will create a momentum, that will create jobs. The government will be able to plan more carefully and basically inject some momentum, as Dr. Bazubandi was saying, about investing money into some of the banks and governmental companies. I think there will be an immediate psychological impact. There will be an economic momentum, but the real momentum will come in stages after sanctions are lifted.
All right, Dr. Sara Bazubandi, do you share that view? And what's your view on this, what's been talked about here, the psychological impact and the fact that it will take time?
Absolutely. The market confidence very much is driven by the emotions within the consumer market and investment market. And now that confidence is about to be regained as a result of this deal. Of course, the actual tangible impact of the sanctions lift takes time. And one needs to be mindful of the fact that part of the economic hardship in today's Iran economy is as a result of structural issues as a result of bad policy makings, monetary fiscal policy making as a result of misuse and mismanagement of assets. And none of these problems are going to go away with the lift of sanctions. So even, I'm sorry that I'm going to give rather gloomy a picture perhaps here, that, but what I'm trying to say is that even after the period that is required for the implementation of the sanction lift, we are likely to still witness some of the structural the problems and issues in the Iranian economy. And as long as those are in place, it is going to affect the impact of the sanctions.
Let's talk a little bit more about some of those potential problems then, because statistics show Iran doesn't look like a particularly safe bet as a business partner. Now, Iran is number 171 out of 186 countries ranked for economic freedom by the Heritage Foundation. Last year's survey looks at issues ranging from property rights to entrepreneurship, prosperity and opportunity. And taking a look at corruption in Iran, Transparency International ranking Iran 136 out of 175 countries. This based on how corrupt public sectors are perceived to be by experts, businesses and independent institutions. And how competitive is Iran? From the 144 economies ranked by the Trading Economics Report, Iran ranked 83, dropping from 82 last year. So Bijan Khajipur, a pretty sobering set of numbers there. It does seem Iran has a lot of work to do in getting investors back into the country and convincing them that that is a good place to be.
Absolutely. The list is much longer than you just mentioned. I mean, it's a very sad legacy of the Ahmadinejad years, of populist policies, and also a very different attitude to corruption, unfortunately. I always argue that Iran had under-the-table corruption before Ahmadinejad, and then during Ahmadinejad it became over-the-table corruption. The good news is that the new government, the Rouhani government, is addressing some of these issues. It's not a secret anymore that there is major administrative and financial corruption, and all top leaders, including the supreme leader, the president, the head of judiciary, all of them have committed to fight corruption and to present solutions. We also have, for the first time probably in post-revolutionary history in Iran, we have a very strong representation of the business community inside the government. I mean, Dr. Nahavandian, who is now the chief of staff, was the president of the Iran Chamber of Commerce and knows all these issues, how government and semi-governmental organizations limit the space for the private sector. It's a tall list. It is important that sanctions be lifted before the government can actually attend to some of these issues, because a number of the issues, especially let's say the opportunities for corrupt dealings, were also a result of these sanctions. We should not forget, when you limit the banking transactions between an economy like the Iranian one and the rest of the world, you basically open the door to money laundering and to corrupt dealings. When you have an economy that has to have multi-tiered exchange rates, you open the door to corruption. So I think the sanctions relief will be a starting point.
Sure, let's put that then to Sadegh Zibakalam. I mean, the argument there that the continued sanctions has actually made the problems in Iran worse with corruption and so on. What do you say to that?
Well, I quite agree with my colleague, Dr. Bijan Khajipur. He is right. Sanctions, in fact, and rather to circumvent sanctions, as the Iranian used to say, to go around it, meant corruption, meant increased corruption. Part of the reason why the hardliner government during the 8 years of Ahmadinejad rule, why Iran became so much polluted with corruption, was because of the sanction, and in order to try to as it were to bypass sanctions. Now, Dr. Hajaburi is right. Sanctions would no longer be there. But unfortunately, there is something else which is again pushing the corruption inside the Iranian economy, and that is the coming of more than 100 billions of Iranian frozen assets.
And on that, we are going to have to leave it. Thank you to all three of our guests, Sadiq Zibakhalam in Tehran, Sara Bazubandi in London, and Bijan Khajipour in Vienna. Thanks very much for being on Inside Story. And thank you for watching. As always, we welcome your thoughts on this. You can get in touch with us through our program page on aljazeera.com. Post your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or tweet us using @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hazem Sika, and the whole team here, goodbye for now.